Jordan Love. So the Chargers allow the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and the most passing yards per game this season. Jordan Love passed for a season high 289 yards just last week, which marked his fifth top 12 fantasy finish on the year. Love has finished 4 weeks with multiple touchdowns and opened up the year hot with back-to-back weeks, throwing 3 touchdowns. Great matchup to repeat as a top 12 quarterback in week 11. I'm not super sold on Jordan Love every week, but I feel like if the matchup's there, he is a decent streaming. Same game, Devin Singletary. The Cardinals allow the third most fantasy points per game to running backs and the fifth most rushing yards per game this season. Dameon Pierce missed weeks 9 and 10 and looks to be on track to miss another game. He didn't practice on Thursday. Devin Singletary had a big day in week 10, rushing 30 times for 150 yards and a touchdown. 31 touches last week was an extremely high number of touches. It's heavy volume, and we love to see that when it comes to running backs for fantasy football. So he made the most of it last week. The Cardinals present a positive opportunity for Singletary to stay hot. I like him back in lineups if you really need a running back. 4 touchdowns back-to-back weeks. So to all the guys that are pulling out the stats about historically this, and that didn't happen, I hope you reflected on that just a little bit. But he finishes a top 3 quarterback in those 2 specific weeks before exiting the next week, week 6, with an injury that has kept him out the following 4 games from the lineup. Fields, we know, led all quarterbacks last season with 1,143 rushing yards. So we know the upside is there. The scary thing is that the upside started to be there through the air. And he established a great connection with DJ Moore, who's going off for fantasy football himself, and Cole Kmet looked great with Justin Fields this year so far as well when he was healthy. I like Justin Fields a lot in his first week back, especially just kind of thinking that, you know what, it's not like he just started practicing yesterday. I think he could have played last Thursday, and they played it safe. He's good to go in week 11. Emphasis on Davante Adams in a game that probably is going to have to be through the air. Volume is king when it comes to fantasy football. And I think against Miami, it's going to have to be the case. They're going to have to emphasize Davante Adams. Mike Evans faces the 49ers, who allow the 9th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. After cooling off weeks 8 and 9, he finished as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver just last week. He caught 6 of his 10 targets for 143 receiving yards and a touchdown. Week 11 marked Evans's 5th week scoring 17-plus fantasy points, 3rd week scoring over 20. He's earned 10 targets in 4 games. He's finished week 2 with 171 receiving yards, scored 6 touchdowns this season. It's been a good year for Mike Evans. He will be leaned on heavily in this matchup against the 49ers, who are 6-3. You know, it is a good defense, but they are very friendly to wide receivers, and the Buccaneers offense is going to have to match the 49ers offense. So Brock Purdy plays, again, same matchup, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and the 2nd most passing yards per game this season. Brock Purdy has finished as a top 12 quarterback in back-to-back weeks and 5 times this season. Purdy's coming off of his best fantasy week, throwing 19 for 26 for 296 yards and 3 touchdowns. He threw 365 yards back in week 8. He's thrown a 70% plus completion percentage in 5 games, and he's thrown multiple touchdowns in 4 games this season. Smash matchup for a quarterback who is hot right now. Brock Purdy is probably going to be my start of the week when I come out with that video tomorrow. So the Titans allow the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. Christian Kirk was the one that finished, with a solid week last week. He caught 6 of his 11 targets for 104 receiving yards, and he seems to be the more safe play at the end of the day when it comes to the wide receiver room for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I just want to shoot for upside when it comes to Calvin Ridley. I'll make the call again, and I'll apologize for it again if I have to. But, he failed me last week in that 49ers blowout. But the Jaguars just look bad in general in that week. I think it could be a bounce-back week. We've seen the big days out of Calvin Ridley. Wide receiver 6 in week 1, wide receiver 9 in week 5. Both of those games over 100 receiving yards, both games with a touchdown, and both games with over 20 fantasy points. The issue is just the consistency and volume with, 6 weeks of 7 or more targets, but also 3 weeks of under 5 targets. So if the volume is there, I do like Calvin Ridley in a plus matchup, in an opportunity to bounce back.